Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to Lost in the Wasteland, my weekly show where I interview someone and we get a deeper perspective on their perspective on movies. And this week I have a friend of mine from Ryder, Emmaleigh, who's joining me. So welcome to the show, Emmaleigh.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you and looking forward to chatting some movies with you. But before we jump into all of my lovely questions, would you like to shamelessly plug anything that our viewers can check out of yours?
Absolutely. So I have an Instagram page. It's Emily Angeline. I'm sure in the writing
Well,
section for this, Shane will write it out because my name is
yes.
spelled differently than most people would expect. My Facebook, Emmaleigh Hauck, and my LinkedIn, Emmaleigh Hauck. So those are my main pages. If anyone ever wants to chat movies, chat anything else about what I do, I'm going to school to be a counselor, so I'm always up to talking mental health. That's a really important topic to me. So
Awesome. And yes, I will have all the links in the description in the video. So if you want to connect with Emmaleigh, you check it out there. But to get things started, always like to ask this question first, which generally is usually for some people a very easy question and other one an excruciating one. But Emmaleigh, what's your favorite film?
so I had to think really hard about this because there's a lot of films from a lot of different genres that I like that
Mhm.
are completely different from each other, and it's hard for me to say one's better than the other.
It's
But if I
understandable.
had to choose one, I'd probably say The Breakfast Club, the good old John Hughes.
There you go. So why is The Breakfast Club your favorite film?
I feel like it's probably one of the most relatable films I've ever seen. It's not that I personally feel like, oh, I could see myself as this character, but I could see my friends in different characters. I could see that situation as being something that, could have happened to me in school, or it's just, it's so realistic as, actual kids in school. And I feel like a lot of movies really glamorize school and make it out to be something that it's not. It's completely unrealistic, and you have 35-year-olds playing 18-year-olds. And it's just not really relatable. But when you watch The Breakfast Club, it's just it's real. It's like visceral.
Which is it's interesting because you're not the only person that said that's your favorite film that's actually come onto my show. Actually, like my brother, that's his favorite film. I the main reason I even knew about John Hughes was because my brother would watch those movies all the time. And like Breakfast Club is that kind of thing where it's just like, the it was a trendsetter kind of thing because it's like we've seen films and TV shows that have tried to do the same thing as the Breakfast Club, and have the ragtag group of like a jock and a stoner and the weird girl and the popular girl and just the nerd and getting stuck in Saturday detention together and having some guy who raids Barry Manilow's wardrobe. Just that you mess with a bull, you'll get the horns, kid. And it's so interesting, like even like the janitor, like the custodial worker is just like a fun time. And all of us have had some kind of high school experience for the most part. And I have to admit, I never spent a day in Saturday when I was a student, but I definitely knew people who did. And I also knew who ran Saturday detention. They were much better hands at my school because Mr. Bill's the best. He was a student liaison. He was my shot put coach too. The only time I ever sat in the in-school suspension room was because I had track practice with him. But unfortunately, my brother spent some actual days there at some point. But it is that relatable thing, and like I appreciate you bringing up like 30 something year olds playing high schoolers because like I remember at a much too young age when my stepbrothers and my brother and my cousin would try to show me American Pie, just like looking at a bunch of dudes that look like they're 30 being in high school. And then I don't know if it's being 30 now and looking at what high schoolers look like and just being like, are you five? But John Hughes was something special and being able to write relatable films like that.
I'm a fan of all John Hughes films, but that's my favorite pick.
Hey, he even wrote Home Alone.
Did he really?
Yep, he wrote Home Alone. He didn't direct it, Christopher Columbus did, but like you can even tell watching something like Home Alone, you feel that like spark and that heart in it. You know, even like the scene with the mom and like John Candy on that in like that bus, it's just like it's heartwarming. And then you watch Home Sweet Home Alone on Disney Plus and then realize, oh, that's sorely missed. I don't know if you checked out the new Home Alone movie, but
It's yes, I get what you mean. I agree that it's missing that warmth.
yeah, it just I hate all of them. I'm like, I don't want any of you to win in this situation. Now, I always love taking a step back and having people think about the earliest memories of movies. So, Emily, what was your earliest memory of going to the movies?
So this one is I didn't even have to think about this one. This one I know off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it was 2002 that Snow Dogs came out.
Very nice.
And I had to have been, I guess, 7 years old, 6 maybe. And it's a great movie. I love the movie, so how can I forget it? I still watch it every year. But I went with my mom and my aunt, my grandmother, and my cousin, and it's just a nice family memory.
There you go. I remember having Snow Dogs on VHS. And unlike you, I think I was 11 when that came out. And like, I remember watching that tape a lot. And like, Cuba Gooding Jr. was so popular then.
He really was. I haven't seen him in a lot of films lately, but he's a great actor.
Yeah, I think the last big thing, I know I've definitely seen him in some smaller stuff, but like I remember watching American Crime Story where he played OJ. And like that was like a big thing when that came out. But Snow Dogs was, it's one of those fun, because like who doesn't love animals? I know you love
I
animals.
do. It's a real good movie, and if you see me jerk the screen around, it's because my cat is biting me while we talk. So, so just fair warning.
Yes, I have my door closed and neither of my cats are in here. But they were sure being super adorable tonight while I was sitting on the recliner. Uh Animals are so much fun. And like, having a movie where it's like you could like there's a level of like I enjoy this movie, but then there's animals in it. It just makes it that much better.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of animals, I feel like that's one of the first conversations we ever had about movies. Is we spoke about Fantastic Beasts,
There you
and that's when
go.
you told me to watch out for the animals because that's the best part of the film. And you were right. It's 100% the best part of the film.
They definitely were. And then they didn't really focus on them much in the second one. And then it's just like, where'd the Fantastic Beasts go? Why is this called Fantastic Beasts?
There were Fantastic Beasts, but I don't know what happened to them.
I don't know. There better be more Fantastic Beasts in the third one because I know that's coming.
April. I'm pretty sure it's April.
We'll have to see. I think we could, it's been so interesting the past year and a half being like my first reaction to it's like supposedly coming out a certain time. But I think at this point, like movies are actually coming out when they're supposed to now. So it'll be interesting to see because I was fine with Crimes of Grindelwald, but like I enjoyed the first one. There's definitely some heart in it. And I'm like, did this really have to do with like Grindelwald and stuff like that? I'm like, I feel like we could have just watched this movie about him trying to catch all these crazy creatures, and I think people would have been perfectly happy. But it's not the movie that went out to make. Now, Emily, I know you mentioned earlier about having some favorite films in different genres, but do you have a particular favorite genre of movies?
I'm between two
Okay,
that I feel like can both show up in the same film at points. I'm between science fiction and fantasy.
there you go.
I feel like that could kind of cross over, so it's really hard to choose. If I had to pick, probably science fiction, but then there's Harry Potter, so I can't.
It's hard to ignore Harry Potter, especially when you're even remotely our age. It's like there's a whole entire thing growing up.
Oh yeah, I would buy the books as they came out. I read the first book in first grade, and I was going to book releases growing up, so I always gonna have a special place in my heart. That's my seasonal. If I had to pick a seasonal favorite for fall, winter, Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. I remember, especially towards the tail end of them coming out, going up to Walmart the day they came out, getting my book, going home, and usually finishing it in 2 days.
Oh yeah.
Because I even remember reading the first one and being terrified of the Forbidden Forest scene with Voldemort, and just like, I remember laying there as, when did I read that? I guess I was 10 and being like pretty freaked out by it. But love Harry Potter. And one of my favorite memories of going to the movies is I saw Deathly Hallows Part 2 and, almost cried.
That movie is something else. Honestly, I feel like Deathly Hallows Part 2 out of all the films, it's not like a movie that I like to rewatch, but I feel like it's my favorite because it's really them as adults and it's not focused on the school, but the actual like wizarding world. And I feel like that gave it a different appeal to me.
It's funny because I'm trying to think of gifts that I use more or things that I quote more than always. And like that just sequence in that movie hits so hard. And I remember reading the book when that came out and just being like shock. And just Alan Rickman.
Oh,
don't
make me cry, Shane.
But like Harry Potter was like a whole entire thing, and like it's crazy to think that Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings came out like a month between each other in 2001, and like it's hard to find any fantasy films that are better than Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, at least in live action. I feel like animation, there's so many great fantasy films because it's like, I think it's easier to make them in animation. It's really hard to make like a believable world that's not real. And you have science fiction too, which I'm a huge fan of science fiction. So is there a particular type of science fiction that you love? Are you like the dystopian person?
I'm like a space person. I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
There you go.
I've seen all the movies a dozen times. So I do like if we're not talking movies, if we're talking shows, I love Star Trek. I know Star Trek ventured into making movies, etc. The movies are not my favorite movies. I do enjoy them. I think some of the scenery is great. But definitely I would say the space theme.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars. I've been watching Star Wars since I was a kid, and like even if some of them are not my favorite movies, how can you not get super excited whenever something new Star Wars comes out and you're just like going out to a theater or watching on Disney Plus now? Oh, I religiously watch The Mandalorian every single week, trying to get through a day of work without looking on Twitter or Instagram and having something spoiled for you was a whole entire skill that you had to learn when Mandalorian was on, and like Book of Boba Fett comes out at the end of December, which is exciting.
So cool.
I'm slowly getting into Star Trek because like I never watched that when I was younger. And this is gonna sound really bad, but the first thing that I ever watched Star Trek was the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek.
Oh my gosh.
And so like my perception was like I saw all three of those movies, and I've gone back and like I've watched Star Trek the Motion Picture, Wrath of Khan's amazing. And the only shows that I guess that I've like really watched, which is really interesting, is I love Lower Decks, the Paramount Plus one, the animated one, which basically is like it's a comedy, but like from what I can tell, it's pretty true to like Star Trek fans, even though it's a little raunchy. Because it's from at least one of the guys from Rick and Morty. And then I did, which is, I don't know if it was a good idea. I started watching Picard, but I've never watched Next Generation. I'm just like, I want to watch some Patrick Stewart. And then I watched 2 episodes. I'm like, there's a lot that I feel like I'm missing here. But you do what you can. But I can definitely appreciate this science fiction and fantasy as well. And I think they do kind of go hand in hand because there's like a fine line between, because like I know people that'll argue like Star Wars is fantasy because it's like some of the stuff, it's like, is that really going to be like real science at some point? And you know, with the Force and everything, it's just like, I know they tried to explain it with metachlorians and trying to make it sciencey, but like, let's be real here, it was much more like a faith-based thing. But you know, we won't get into that. Now, Emily, do you have a particular favorite filmmaker that you really enjoy?
Yes. And it's funny because my favorite filmmaker hasn't necessarily made any of my favorite films,
Mm-hmm.
but they are films that I love. And my favorite filmmaker is Alfred Hitchcock.
There you go.
Honestly, for that time period, he was really the first person to make horror in a way that it wasn't flailing arms and hysterics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what really brought people's attention to him. Well, first he used, I can go all day about Hitchcock and the scores and, you know, and the psychosexual dynamics and
Mm-hmm.
nuances in it. But everything, it was just like, if you think of like Psycho,
Yeah.
when she's in the shower and he comes in the room and it's just almost like a silent terror, you know, almost how someone would freeze and panic if something like that were to actually happen, you know, because it not everyone's gonna have the flight reaction in
Yeah.
the midst of terror. You know, a lot of people are gonna freeze, and I feel like it was just so, I don't want to say realistic as like, oh, this definitely looks like someone getting stabbed in a shower, but for the time, you know, it was great, and it was something that, you know, it was believable,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't like a one of like these lower budget and horror films where people just run and scream the whole movie. It was something that, you know, it's scary. It's scary
Yeah.
to be in that situation and to panic and not know what to do.
And so, and this is interesting too, because I have another show on my channel called Welcome to the Wasteland, because you know, I have to keep up branding and stuff like that. But I take a deep dive into a particular film every week. And right now I'm going through different directors, and I won't be surprised if at some point Hitchcock winds up being voted. So I'll definitely reach out to you to have you on for a Hitchcock episode.
I love it.
Um, but like, I remember watching Hitchcock for the first time in cinema class in high school. And you're right in terms of like what was horror before that was like universal creature features. You have Frankenstein's monster, you have Dracula, you have the Mummy, the creature from the Black Lagoon. You probably had Hammer horror, which was building off of that, but like much bloodier and like darker. And like, you know, the really cheesy 50s style, like them, the thing from another world, and where it's just like kind of silly. And then you had somebody who was an extremely impressive craftsman come in and really build terror. And Psycho is unnerving, that whole shower scene. Like I think one of the most haunting things is like she's just in the shower and all you see is through the curtain, door creeping open. There's a figure coming in, and that curtain pulls back, and it's just this shadowed figure. And I love Vertigo. Vertigo is one of my favorite films, and I got to see the 75th anniversary in theaters.
That's nice. That's nice.
And that is a disturbing, messed up movie from just like a psychological human perspective.
I don't think I've ever seen a film with so many twists and turns where I changed my mind so many times as to what was going to happen.
Well, and that's such an interesting thing too, because it's like, you know, the lead is Jimmy Stewart. We love Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart kind of turns into a bastard by the end of the movie, and you're just like, and then, but the thing is, you start to realize like maybe he kind of was one the whole entire time, and like the really unfortunate relationship that he has. What is it, Midge? Like his former fiance, like that is such a toxic, so toxic relationship going on, and then obviously as the film goes on, things just get even more toxic. And like the third act of that film is so uncomfortable. and you're just like, bad touch, red flags everywhere. It's like, you should get out of here. But it just has that feeling, and there's not many filmmakers quite like Hitchcock. And I've definitely seen, at least even in my life, people try to be like, and like Shyamalan, and that's Hitchcock.
Oh,
And look how that turned out.
not Hitchcock.
He had a few really strong movies. No Hitchcock though. But
Even like even the early ones, they're all good. I don't think I've seen a single Hitchcock film that I haven't liked.
I like, there's quite a few of them I'm a huge fan of. Like, strangely, I quote Strangers on a Train a lot. And for some reason, Bruno is such an interesting character. And when Guy finally like snaps and like pushes him, and he's just like, you shouldn't have done that, Guy. And I'm just like, the amount of times that I've strangely quoted that in my actual life is strange. But the delivery and everything, and that I even, with Jojo, who has been on the show before, and Emily, Jojo, one time for Christmas, she bought me this classic set of Hitchcock films, and somewhere up there. And like, they're like the old school, like it has Saboteur on it, and a whole bunch of like early Hitchcock films. So, and obviously he had so many great films. So, but shifting gears a little bit from instead of behind the camera, out in front, do you have any particular favorite actors or actresses?
Modern or at any time period?
Any time period.
Lauren Bacall. Not even a competition for my favorite. She is by far my favorite actress.
And like, going old school there.
Yeah, some of her movies are some of my favorites. I just feel like she's got just such a personality that's, she wasn't trying to look like the women of the time. She wasn't falling into like that stereotype, that typical look. She talked her way, she walked her way. She was such an individual and just such a strong actress. And just her voice, you could hear her voice on a recording. You don't have to see her, and it's her.
So have you ever heard of the podcast You Must Remember This?
I don't think so.
So my fiance Jess got me onto it because like she loves like historical things and stuff like that. And basically which is very interesting because the woman who does the podcast, and she does such an amazing job with it, incredible research and everything. Apparently she's actually, I think, married to Rian Johnson.
Oh.
And it was like, I remember looking her up, I'm like, oh, look at that. But the thing is, like, this whole podcast is about like old Hollywood and stuff like that. So like, maybe you'll be interested checking it out.
What's it called?
You Must Remember This.
You Must Remember This. Okay, I'll keep that one in mind. I'll definitely look that up.
When I was on a big podcast kick over the summer, I think I got through like 50 episodes of it. There's a lot of episodes, but the thing is, they're all labeled by like what they're about. So you could jump to some that like really interest you. But it's cool getting to talk about some of like early Hollywood, like golden age of Hollywood. And like, you just had some of those personalities back then. It's like one of my favorite like facetious impressions to do is like Katharine Hepburn. And just having some of those actresses back then were just so big personalities. And it's really easy to think that like all the women back then were just like the sideshow next to like the male leads and stuff like that. But some of them were really like, you having Katharine Hepburn in films with like Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart, and obviously Spencer Tracy and her were in a lot of movies together. And you have like, it's interesting taking a step back and looking at some of those early films, and like they had some strong like female characters in some of those films. Some of them are a little awkward. I remember talking about a Philadelphia Story recently, and within the first 2 minutes, you see Katharine Hepburn getting punched in the face, and then she drops to the ground, and she's just like, I'm just like, I'm like, this was made in 1940. I don't think this was be made today. But having some of the like, it's cool that you have appreciation for like some of the early stars of Hollywood and stuff like that.
Yeah, growing up, I spent a lot of time with my mom and my grandmother. My grandmother always had them on the TV. So
There you go.
the last movie I watched with her was, I believe, called Mr. Skeffington.
I haven't heard of that one.
It's Mr. Skeffington. It's I just looked it up. 1944.
Okay.
So that's Betty Davis, Claude Rains. That's a good one. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Claude Rains.
Claude Rains is wonderful.
Like I got to see Casablanca for the first time in a theater, which
awesome.
was really cool. I saw it with my friend Kevin and his girlfriend Carolyn, and I swear that movie would kill today. It's so funny and sharp, and like Claude Rains is just an absolute delight in that movie. And like I have, like I mentioned Universal Horror earlier, I have all those old Universal Horror films, and like he was the Invisible Man. And not gonna lie, a couple of times over the summer, I like, especially like in like the heat of COVID, like going out with like a mask on, I had my sunglasses on and like a hat on, and just being like, I'm Claude Rains, like, and just like Invisible Man. And it's just like kind of having that feeling, because like I had people comment that a couple of times, because like you couldn't even see my face. It's like big hat, big glasses, mask on. But there's like so many great personalities in like early Hollywood. It's interesting because like I watched a lot of movies with my mom growing up, but a lot of them were love action movies. Probably why I love action movies so much. And then like I would watch stuff with my, like the things I would watch with like my mom and my grandma were like Murder, She Wrote and Golden Girls. Golden Girls is awesome.
Golden Girls is awesome.
And if anybody ever gives you crap for loving Golden Girls, you could tell Sophia, put a little curse on them. She'll do it.
She'll do it.
And she's Sicilian. It'll stick. Now, Emily, what's a film that you feel like you could just pop in and watch like every day?
I'd probably say any of the, either like the Harry Potter films or Star Wars. Yeah. I like the fact that they're long series. So I could pop in any film from any of either of the series. I've read all the Harry Potter books too, so I can, I'm so familiar with the lines that honestly, I could watch it with my eyes closed and be happy just listening to it, just for the storyline. But if I had to pick one out of all of them, I'd probably say Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, first movie. It's just such a heartwarming film. Like, I mean, it's got like the aspects of Voldemort coming in the end, and it's got like that little bit of like the thrill, but overall, it's not overwhelming. It's just kind of a feel good movie for the most part, with him like realizing who he is and finally feeling some sense of pride and making friends, and it's a nice movie, especially holiday time again with the Christmas and the Halloween stuff. It's fun.
There's a troll in the dungeon.
There is a troll in the dungeon.
But like what's so interesting, because like we grew up with Harry Potter and they grew up with us. So it's kind of like they matured as we got older. So like you were at the like perfect age when like Sorcerer's Stone came out. It was just like this magical, wonderful film. And speaking to the thing where you could like watch it with your eyes closed, I was at a drive-in actually in the Delsey Drive-In.
Okay.
Oh, and Jess and I were seeing a double feature of Toy Story.
Oh, that's fun.
Which is great. And then War with Grandpa with Robert De Niro in it, which I'm just like, Robert De Niro, how much money did you need that you had to do this movie? But But on the other screen, they had Harry Potter on. And I would occasionally look over, I'm like, I know exactly what's going on in this movie. And like I didn't even need like to turn the radio to that station. Like I knew exactly what was going on. Because we just watched them so many times.
It's Harry Potter. How could you not know?
Exactly. Now, I love asking this question because I feel like this is something that is a little bit different, but what's a film that you feel like you connect with because it relates to another interest of yours?
It might seem like an odd choice, but The Theory of Everything would probably be my pick. Eddie Redmayne. It's
Interesting.
Eddie Redmayne, I believe,
Yeah.
is the actor. And I feel one because I'm going to school for rehabilitation counseling, so anything that talks about people who have disabilities, what their lives are actually like, like what things are like for them on a daily basis. It's something for us to go watch a movie and watch for like an hour or two how someone lives. But for these individuals, that's how they live their entire lives. That's
Mhm.
all day, every day. It's not a gimmick or a fad or glamorized. It is what it is. And I think it's nice, nice being a subjective word, to have films that really show what people go through, what people's life experiences really are. And that film particularly is important to me because I had a cousin who had ALS
Mhm.
and who passed from it. And so I feel that, really seeing the experience of someone having ALS, and not just having ALS, but, doing such wonderful things with their life regardless and contributing so much to society. I feel like it's so important. And because of like my interests in, advocating for others, I feel like that's a film that's really important to me, and it's something that like I connect with on multiple levels.
And that's very understandable. And like obviously like Stephen Hawking was such an impressive figure and contributor to society and also pretty sassy.
The best sense of humor of any scientist I've ever seen.
Which what's very interesting is like I've watched that film once, and the biggest takeaway that I had was I feel bad for his wife because like obviously his condition didn't stop him from certain things,
Yeah.
like getting with his nurse. Um, and but like I remember seeing them, like obviously Eddie Redmayne was fantastic, and like was it Felicity Jones, I think, plays his wife, and I loved her in it. Even had Charlie Cox, aka Daredevil, as like the other guy that I'm just like, this dude will treat you a lot. But it was I definitely felt like a strong feeling towards those characters in that film, and like obviously like, they were real people
Yeah.
and going through so much. And I can't imagine like obviously having all of that dealing with that and then still being like one of the most renowned scientists in like history and doing all of that. Also, I have an interesting relationship with Eddie Redmayne getting nominated for Oscars and me caring more about his wife in the movie than him. I felt the same exact way with the Danish Girl when I watched that. I'm like, I care a lot more about Alicia Vikander over. But Eddie Redmayne made a big splash with both of those films, and like I remember him in Les Mis for the first time and just being like, "Hey, look, one of them really knows how to sing." It's like not everybody in that movie knows how to sing. Russell Crowe.
Agreed.
But I digress. That's a tangent. But now thinking about more of like actual movie characters, who's a movie character that you feel like you connect with on a personal level?
I feel like it's going to be the most cliche, generalized answer that anyone could possibly think of, but I really love the character of Belle from Beauty and the Beast. And not for the beast aspect, but I've always loved to read. I feel like
Mhm.
I'm a relatively introverted person unless I'm around people that I'm close to. Um, you know, the character lives in a small town where you go out to the local store and everyone pretty much knows everyone. I feel like that's kind of how I live. You go out to the tavern in town to get lunch, and half the people there. I mean, we don't really break out into song, but
It'd
sometimes
be more
someone has
interesting,
a
wouldn't it?
guitar. Sometimes someone has a guitar. I've gone there and seen people playing Congo drums. So, you never know. But I really feel like that character, is just, I don't necessarily feel stuck the way she does in the film, but I
Mhm.
feel like I can really relate to the idea of, it's a small town, you want to do such big things with your life. I want to do big things with my life, and I love to read and I love to gain knowledge and go to school and educate myself. And I feel like that's really how the character was played in the live action film.
Mhm.
And so I feel like out of any movie, cliche as it is, to have it be a Disney princess.
You know, it's like she was always my favorite Disney princess because like I read all the time as a kid and just like Belle's the coolest.
Yeah.
And jokingly relate to the Beast a little bit. But obviously, I don't like hang out in a castle by myself and talk to all of my like home goods and stuff like that. But I always loved Beauty and the Beast. That was always my favorite Disney movie. And there's definitely things about the live action one that I really appreciated. Like they updated some stuff, like, not making him like a 10-year-old who gets turned into a beast because he's being a brat. I'm like, that's a little excessive, witch. But like him being like a jerk, like actual adult, like prince, like that makes more sense to me. I could understand you wanting to turn him into a beast. But, Beauty and the Beast definitely will always have a special place in my heart. And now, Emily, what's a film that you feel like you love, but would probably surprise people to find out?
That would surprise people to find out. Probably, I don't know if it would necessarily surprise people, but I feel like I'm not aware of the film. So I feel like people, when I mentioned the film, they're like, "What's that?" It would
Mhm.
be Loving Vincent.
I remember I saw the Princeton Garden Theater when
What an
that came out.
incredible film! Because I love art.
Mhm.
I absolutely love art history, um, and I love like kind of like unsolved crime
Mhm.
type of things, which I feel like it's like an awful way to put that film. But it's so intriguing, and it's just the art is magical, and it really draws you in. And after a while, it's almost like you're just like seeing the world in different colors rather than it being art. It's just so incredible.
And for those who haven't seen Loving Vincent, basically, it's like a bunch of Vincent van Gogh paintings like coming to life. And it's so striking. Like watching like the amount of effort they put into animating that film was so impressive. And that's definitely like one of those kinds of films where it like flew under the radar. Unless like I feel like the main other person that I know who had seen it was my friend Joe, who had a YouTube channel about animated movies. So basically, like he saw it. But like that's a nice deep cut for people. If you haven't seen Loving Vincent, go show it some love. So there you go. It's always a fun thing getting recommendations from people, right? And now, Emily, my last question for you is: what do you love most about movies?
I feel like my favorite part about movies is that no matter what's going on in your life, what you have going on, how your day was, how the year is going, you could sit down with a movie and escape reality for a little bit.
Mhm.
And it's almost like you can, for a short period of time, like live through the eyes of somebody else and experience life in a new way, see a new perspective, see a new place in the world, see a different lifestyle. There's just so many different aspects to it, but it's really something that you can lose yourself in a good way.
And I definitely relate because that's definitely my favorite thing. Like, there's not many things to me more special than going into a movie theater and like the lights going down and a movie starting and you're just in it and getting lost in it. And I definitely miss that for like the vast majority of the past year and a half and slowly getting back to the movies and stuff. Cause like I would go to the movies 5 days or like 5 times a week pre-COVID. So I spent a lot of time there. And just being able to get lost in it. I think that's why I love, like, my favorite film is Lord of the Rings, and just getting lost in this complete other world, and even like getting lost in somebody else's life, even if it's like a realistic and grounded human drama. It's not your life, and you can get lost and connect with somebody else. But now, Emily, I always like to wrap up my show by kind of turning things a little bit and allowing my guest to ask me a question. So, Emily, what question would you like to ask the Wasteland Reviewer?
If there was any movie that you've seen that you would have remade, what film would it be?
So I have very strong feelings about this because this is actually one of my favorite books. Because like I was a extremely avid reader up until close to the end of undergrad at college. And like other things have kind of taken over a lot of my time and stuff like that, and don't read as much. But I Am Legend is one of my favorite books, and they've never got it right.
Oh,
Like there's 3 adaptations of this book. There's a like I think 50s The Last Man on Earth, with Vincent Price in it.
okay.
There's the Omega Man from the 70s with Charlton Heston in it. And then you have the Will Smith one, right? Like actually called I Am Legend. And there's a lot of things that I do love about that movie, but it's not I Am Legend. Because the thing is, like, one, vampires. They had like this big zombie kick in like the 2000s. It's just like, let's just turn them into zombies. Just like, no. One of the most so like that book is scary and haunting. Have you ever read I Am Legend?
No.
So it takes place in the 70s, and this is a scientist who's trying to find a cure for this virus or bacteria or whatever, this virus turning people into vampires. And at night, his best friend, who's a vampire, is literally taunting him from outside his home, playing psychological games with him. There's female vampires trying to seduce him to come out of his home. It's like there's a whole other level of just disturbing and psychological aspects to that. Like obviously Will Smith gives like a really great performance in I Am Legend. I'm also impressed by his ability to quote Shrek, because I also can. Watched that way too many times. But the thing is, it's like there's a whole other aspect to it, and none of them really got the ending right either. Because like it doesn't even get the point of I Am Legend. Because not to spoil too much, but like in the end, he's not really the hero of the story. He's kind of becomes his own boogeyman to other people, and like in none of the movies ever like take on that challenging, deep and complex ending. Like the first movie, like the Will Smith movie, ends with him doing like a heroic like sacrifice, and Charlton Heston does the same thing. I'm trying to remember the ending of the Vincent Price one, but like they trade off for like Hollywood endings. It's hard to sell like, look at this dark ending of the story, because we're going to sell a lot of movie tickets with this. But the thing is, it's like, what, A24 out there, you don't bat an eye to like strange, really messed up horror movies. Go make I Am Legend. So there you go. That's my thoughts. I have very strong feelings about it, as you can tell.
Honestly, I feel like that's the hard part about reading books before watching movies, is because I'd say a vast majority of the time, even with Harry Potter, you watch those films, there's some of the best parts of those books are left out of the films. And I feel like that's why so many movies fall flat, is because, you get these great books that they want to make into movies, and then they're like creative liberties, and the creative liberties are less creative than the actual story.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like I'm a huge fan of The Shining. That's my favorite horror film of all time.
Incredible film.
And you have the book, which I've read, which is also great. But the thing is, they come at things in a very different way, to the point where Stephen King despises the film.
Huh, I didn't know that.
because the book frames as like, this is a very tortured man. I don't think there's a second that you feel bad for Jack Torrance in the movie. No, from the very beginning, Jack Nicholson's just like, and you're just like, that guy's messed up. I would not leave him alone in my hotel for a whole entire winter. But the thing is, they do, and you see what happens. But like even Harry Potter, it's like, like Dobby gets sidelined for like how many books, like movies, and he just pops up randomly.
They never even put Peeves in the movies. The best character.
That was an interesting choice and I guess there's enough ghosts or something or other.
The best ghost who has the biggest part of any of the ghosts in any of the books.
Which is interesting because they shot scenes of
really.
Peeves. There's still photos of the actor who was playing Peeves, and like they just never used it. And I think one of my favorite scenes in the books that never made the films was in Order of the Phoenix, which they cut out a lot from that book, seeing as that was like the longest book and like one of the shortest movies. But like when they go to the hospital and see Mr. Weasley there, and like you see Gilderoy Lockhart, and you find out about Neville's parents and stuff like that. It's like, that was a great chapter in that book. And like, I see why they didn't do it. Because like, did you really need to have that in the movies? I guess not. But like, that's the other thing about books is like, you could put so much extra into it and you're along for the ride. It's a little harder to, I don't know, sit in front of a movie and think like, why am I at this part?
I just feel like the issue with leaving those parts out is that if they make the Cursed Child into a movie and talk about the importance of Neville Longbottom, that leaving out so much of his backstory is going to make it really hard for people to relate to why he was so important.
I remember reading The Cursed Child and being like, greatest hits Harry Potter. And they'll make it because, they'll make money. So they will make it. Yeah. Someday we will see that in our lifetime. And it's going to happen. But that's a very interesting point. That's the thing too, because it's like, I try my best to realize it's like, and it's the things like, I'm a huge fan of like superhero movies and stuff like that. And, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has basically cherry picked so many things and just been like, we're going to call it this, but really not have anything to do with this actual comic book. But that's the thing. Like, they made it their own. And I still can't believe people still complain about it like 12 years later, just like, they're going to do their own thing. And obviously it's successful for them, so they're not going to change it. But, that's the thing about loving different stories in different media, because they're going to be a little different. And unless you make like literally like a word for word adaptation, and sometimes it works. But that's a whole other conversation.
that's a show of its own.
There you go. But Emily, this was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you coming on and chatting movies with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been great. I really enjoyed tonight.
I'm glad. So did I. And would you like to just point out to all of our lovely viewers again where they can find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Emmaleigh Angeline. You can find me on Facebook, Emmaleigh Hauck, and on LinkedIn, Emmaleigh Hauck.
And you check in the description, and I'll have the links there for all of you. But Emily, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.